Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us at MSP Xperience. We're excited to have you here for our technical track on x360Recover for Azure Deep Dive. By way of brief introduction, I'm Adam Prio. I run our product management and operations team here at Axcient. I'm also joined by Lee Fortson, our senior product manager for x360Recover. And we are excited to show off some Azure related functionality today. So in terms of agenda, just quick housekeeping items. We're going to be going through some basic points about Azure to start out. We're going to give an overview of some reasons to back up Azure data, some costs around Azure and what you can expect, and then some information about deploying to Azure. We'll move through those fairly quickly, and then on to the most important part, the bulk of the meeting, is the demo. And so we're excited to show off some of our Azure backup and disaster recovery functionality, and we'll also go in a little bit deeper to some advanced functionality with our proprietary local cache backup mechanism that you can leverage along with Azure or other environments. So with that, we will jump right in. Speaking of MSP evolution, this is really around cloud adoption that's happened over the last decade. And so no one on this call is unfamiliar with this. You've all been living it. You've been seeing your workloads move from, for example, on-prem Exchange, where everything was about 10 years ago, to Microsoft 365, where there may be partners on the call that have no Exchange servers left. Good for you. You've moved everything over to Office 365, and now you may be starting your journey with other workloads, moving those from on-premise to public cloud, especially Azure. And we've been seeing this as a vendor. We introduced our MSP 365 integration almost a decade ago as well, kind of on the forefront of early adoption with Microsoft. And then more recently, we've continued to tweak our tried and true chain-free backup technology to work directly with Azure and to make sure that you're able to really protect everything no matter where those workloads live. So speaking a little bit more about Azure, all of you are aware of the benefits of moving to public cloud. We're not here to sell Microsoft. We're really here just to make sure you're protecting your data that's on it. But as you consider this move and as you move data, you know that Azure's highly scalable. You've got built-in compliance for those areas that you may have clients with compliance needs. Potentially, you're looking at reducing operating costs. If you're operating your own data centers, you may have CapEx involved. And so Azure is a great reason for moving to reduce your CapEx costs. Migration planning is relatively easy. And then in general, you're going to see really good performance out of Azure. Obviously, a lot of options when you're deploying VMs and other services. But in general, you can find very high performance within Azure. And then a global reach. So that's one nice benefit as well around both redundancy and multiple data centers across the globe. For Axcient, this is important because when you look at Azure, no matter where you're deploying, no matter which services you're running, Microsoft provides a shared responsibility model. And if you do a quick web search, you'll find some really nice diagrams out there that Microsoft has actually published around where are the responsibilities of Microsoft, where do they have their SLAs around the services that they provide, and then where do the responsibilities lie on the MSP or the business itself. And one of these, basically the top line, if you look at these diagrams of shared responsibility, the responsibility that's always on the MSP, no matter if you're running a fully on-prem environment that's not Microsoft or all the way up through Microsoft 365 SaaS services, the data layer, so the data that's sitting on top of the services is always your responsibility to protect. So Microsoft actually recommends, and I believe this one's may have been a quote from Microsoft 365, but it applies to Azure as well. But Microsoft always recommends that you're using a third party to back up so you can restore data in case you ever have any kind of accidental deletion ransomware, service outage, any of those things where Microsoft is not responsible for the data, but just for the service itself. So just very important. If you haven't run across that in the past, something to look into regarding how Microsoft supports their services. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Leif, and he's going to talk a little bit about egress.
All right, thanks, Adam. So we kind of wanted to go over and kind of bring some clarity to the Azure cost breakdown. Having talked to quite a few partners and doing surveys and research, we find out there might not be 100% clarity there when trying to determine what those costs might be or could be. So, costs that you might incur with Azure, the only additional cost that you will incur by using X360Recover is some extra egress costs for the data transport from Azure over the internet to the Axcient cloud. So basic storage and compute costs are immutable and part of your Azure hosting. So next, let's dive into the egress costs. The initial backup will be higher than the incremental. So for example, incremental costs are impacted based on the data change between the backups. And then in addition, backup frequency is also important to consider. So let's go over another example. It's recommended to back up your protected system hourly, okay? The X360Recover agent is very efficient. So if you do 24 hourly backups, it will result in slightly more egress data than a single daily backup. However, the pros outweigh the cons. Having more granular recovery points is well worth the few extra pennies it will cost, especially when it comes to like a ransomware event. So next, let's go over some of the storage costs you might incur. For example, the cost of storage is relatively high, so adding a local cache is a premium that may not be worth the cost in many cases. You could anticipate 2 to 3 times the storage usage of the protected system for the local cache storage. Another example that we have listed here is adding a local VM with Azure to act as an appliance or a vault is most likely not cost effective either. The cost of compute and storage to host a dedicated backup VM exponentially outweighs the egress costs of backing up directly to the Axcient cloud. So on the next slide here, we'll be going over the actual Azure egress cost estimator that we have. So for example, the average data size that we've kind of determined for a protected system is right around 650 gigabytes. So depending on whether or not the data is primarily images or video of these types of sources, you can determine whether it's compressible or not. And then also another multiplier is which Azure region you're in. So once you have this all in place, you can kind of see that one-time egress Azure costs will be the larger fee that you'll actually incur. The incremental ones that are going from the incremental backups is you're talking about dollars and pennies when it comes to each of those running on an ongoing basis. So hopefully that brings up some clarity on what that initial one-time egress cost is, as well as the incremental costs or incremental backups thereafter and what those costs might look like as well. And we do have this cost estimator that we can provide to our partners to use as well. So let's go on to the next slides where we'll talk about the benefits between X360Recover and the Azure backup, the native Azure backup. So having more granular recovery points, you can back up every hour or every 15 to 30 minutes if you desire. When you have more granular recovery points, you increase your chance for reducing data loss, right? It's definitely a big pro of having, especially if you ever experience any of those type of events. Having a variety of options to choose from when trying to recover, whether you need to virtualize immediately from a snapshot, export a backup, recover a file folder, or perform a bare metal restore, there's going to be a solution to each of those recovery challenges that you could face with your clients when an event occurs. So no additional storage costs. So you no longer have to worry about retention and how that's going to inflate your bill in Azure as it grows. Storage in Azure is a premium, so you have to keep that in mind. But as it goes over to the Azure cloud, you kind of have that benefit there that you don't have to have the biggest concern of your bill continuing growing over time. Next is having the data in the Axcient cloud gives you more flexibility when you want to recover or restore that data pretty much anywhere. So while it's in our cloud, you can export that as and restore that where you desire. And last but not least, auto verify. With Axcient's automation, partners can save time and resources because the automation virtualizes a backup, then performs a test that validates if key services have started, and then documents that boot VM screenshot, which can be used in our client-facing or internal reporting. So as for cons, there's not that many cons listed here. Being in the Azure cloud, if you try to do a full image recovery, it's going to be faster because you're not leaving the Azure platform. But in this case, when you leave the Azure cloud, that's going to be the where you're going to actually run into some time issues of being slower. So, but in this case, the pros outweigh the cons when it comes to business continuity and disaster recovery. So let's go over some.
Thanks, Leif. And sorry to interrupt. I was just going to add, we've done some deep surveying and conversations with our partners this year on Azure, and definitely found a few camps and a number of, one of those camps is partners that are just checking the box with Azure backup. And when we talk to some of those partners, some of the first questions we ask are, well, have you ever tested those backups? And the answer is usually no. I don't even know how to do that with Azure. And then the second question we ask is, what's your recovery time objective? And just because a VM is running on Azure doesn't mean it's not susceptible to ransomware, does not mean it's not susceptible to service outages. And so when considering whether you need a full disaster recovery solution, your RTO and recoverability, I think, is a key question for your clients. And having those backups offsite in the Axcient cloud that are tested continually gives you confidence that you can recover at the RTO your client needs anytime, even though the original data source is in Azure. So I think that's a great and compelling argument for some of your clients that may not be fully aware of how things are being backed up or what their recovery options might be. So anyhow, sorry to interrupt, Leif, just wanted to add that.
I appreciate that. That actually, goes back to the time and resources that saves you your time, because those things are actually happening while, everyone's sleeping, and doing those validations for you. So let's go over how you would deploy to Azure on the next slide here. So there's two different options that you can choose. And the first option is to manually download the agent and then install it locally on the Azure VM. So that's one option that you have. But the most common approach that you're going to encounter is probably when onboarding clients is deploying it through your RMM. So typically you'll have some scripts ready to run, and you can easily do this through majority of the RMM tools that are out there. So these are the two different ways you can deploy. And one of the most common ways is to do it through your RMM. All right, so let's go over some ways of how we can, or some demos here. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. All right, one part we want to actually go over is actually setting up local cache with our Azure VM. So right now I'm already logged into my Azure portal, and I've already have a Azure VM created and set up. It's already running. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to have to create a storage account. I've already have one here set up beforehand. So I've created a storage account. This is all documented in our Arcadia system for detailed steps. But I'm just going to go real high level of the general areas that you need to do to configure this. So once the storage account's been created, you'll actually create a file share. Once the file share has been created, the next thing that you'll be doing is adding a directory. Once the directory has been added to your file share, you'll be able to get your connection information. You'll access this by clicking Show Script, which will give you your username, your password, and then your local cache path. And you'll see where that actually matters. I'm not going to show you the information here because it does have my username and password. So I'm going to actually navigate over to Axcient, x360Recover. I'm actually going to go into my vault. So I should already have this set up. I'm already in my vault. I'll locate that Azure VM, which is listed here, Leaf Azure Workstation. The next thing that you're going to do is click on the agent configuration button. You're going to locate the local cache settings and expand those. As I said previously, when we go over to the portal an Azure portal, there's a show script, which will give you this information for your path, the username, and the password. You're going to key those in, and you're going to click save. Once that information has been saved, if you want this to be set up now, you can actually schedule it, or you wait for the next incremental run to occur. And the next time it occurs, you should have your local cache enabled and should have a successful verification, as indicated down here on the protected system details. You can also notate the icon, which indicates in green that it's been completed successfully. So you can see that here on the detail screen, as well as on the grid itself. You'll see it light up in green. That knows that it's working, everything is good to go. All right, now that we set up local cache for my Azure VM, let's go over how I can actually do a recovery using local cache with the DDC agent.
And Leif, if you don't mind me interrupting again, sorry. Just for those that aren't aware of our local cache technology, briefly, we built local cache as an optional backup repository that you can use in combination with our direct cloud backup. And direct cloud backups will take backups directly offsite to the Axcient cloud. But if you want a local copy of backup data on an inexpensive device that can speed up file recoveries or virtual disk exports, we built it originally to run as a repository in a physical environment on a NAS device or a locally attached device. But what we've done more recently is adapted that technology to run in Azure on Azure files. And so you can have that same local backup repository in addition to direct cloud running directly on Azure. So the same scenario applies if you have to recover a few files, want to do that very quickly using the recovery center that Leif is going to show here, along with your local Azure files repository, can in some cases be much faster than transferring data from the Axcient cloud back into Azure. So this can be very useful, especially if you want to do very fast recoveries, either with files or with entire exported disks. So sorry, Leif, continue.
Oh, yeah, no worries. I appreciate the detailed explanation there. I'm actually on the Azure VM itself, so I'm locally on here. This is Recovery Center, where you can download this separate tool to actually, it requires a login, your x360Recover login to access it. I'm already logged in. I'm going to go ahead and click Start New Recovery, where I'll be presented with some options of my recovery methods. I can do a virtual disk export, I can recover some files and folders, or I can even do a bare metal restore. So for today's demo, we're going to do recover some files. I'm going to make it a test in this case. I'm going to locate the company that I have my Azure VM tied to, which is Dental Express. Once that has been selected, I'll just verify the data source and the protected system is the one I want. I'll click Next. The next point is actually selecting your recovery point. So if there's a particular time, when there's the event occurred and I need to be able to pick that particular snapshot, this will be all presented here. I'll use the calendar to pick the calendar picker to pick which date and time that it is the desired one. For this case, I'm going to pick one from an early one from today. Click Next. And then you'll present it an option whether you want to restore directly from the cloud or from local cache. If we did from cloud, it would actually go back over to the Axcient cloud and download from there to the Azure environment. So in order to be a faster times, kind of simulate similar to having a traditional BDR and having that appliance locally, we're going to use local cache. Now, this might look familiar with you. We actually have the location path that we're going to input, just as we did on the setup screen for setting up local cache, as well as that username and password. So I'm going to go ahead and paste this in here. So I'll paste the location, my username and password. Click Next to verify that those credentials are correct. Once they verify that, I'll select a drive to mount with. So I'll pick Z in this case, and then I'll click Start File Recovery. This will actually initialize and start going through all the steps and to do the recovery for the file and folders that I specified. It only takes a matter of seconds, depending on the size. In this case, it shouldn't take that long at all. We can monitor it here, and it should be done. So in this case here, we'll actually showcase what it could actually look like afterwards. So once I verify it, I'll click on the Windows drive and I'll actually see my files and folders that I've recovered. All right, so for the next one we're going to do is we're going to actually go over is setting up. Actually, let me stop this here, stop the job. Make sure that's added, delete the job. Great. So next thing is I'm going to go and show how I can use Virtual Office with the protected system to do a quick recovery and virtualize it, say in the event that I need to do something right away. Maybe an event occurred where an application server such as payroll went down and you need to pay people, but you can't, the application's down, you can't get to it. Well, you can virtualize that environment leveraging Axcient x360Recover Virtual Office. So I'll go back into Recover Manager. I'll go over to Clients, locate the client that is in question, Dental Express. Click Recovery Wizard. I'll make it virtual. Start a virtual office. In this case, you have an option to either make it a test. So for example, if you're trying to do like some DR testing, you can do make it a test, or if this is going to go right into production, like this is an event, disaster recovery, this, we could do this here. So this, for demo purposes, we're going to make it a test. I have the option to select run books or not. In this case, I'm just going to do a one-off virtualization. Click next, input my information. Click Start Virtual Office. This will take a minute or so to initialize. And depending on the size, it could take a little bit longer than others, but this is relatively a smaller VM, so it should only take a minute or so to occur. Good thing about using runbooks is, say, for example, runbooks in Virtual Office, if you had a series of VMs that you kind of wanted to orchestrate and kind of work in a certain sequence and start up, and you want to do a particular, some DR testing for auditing purposes or for insurance purposes, you can easily leverage runbooks that's contained in Virtual Office to do that. Kind of, there's some pre-work to get all that configured, but once you do it, it's going to save you time going forward and making sure you have all that advanced network configuration all configured and set up beforehand. All right, so our Virtual Office is actually set up here. We'll go ahead and render our environment. We're going to specify some resources that need to be set for this VM. So we give it some cores here and some memory. I can enable safe mode at a point. If there's a particular snapshot that I want to restore to, I can select that here. Click Render. This should take only seconds to do. Once this is completed, we'll be able to start the VM and then be able to get to it. So this will list all my VMs, whether they're test or whatnot, or production, and I can see all of them listed here for this particular client. There is something to note. So for test VMs, you get per protected system 30 days for free. Anything after that, there is a overage charge for that. So now that it's ready, I'll go ahead and click Start. We'll see that the VM status indicates that it is starting. Won't take much longer. It's now running. Oops. Yep. There we go. And then I have all the information, the details here, free days used, remaining, paid days, so on and so forth. Gives us any configuration information that I need to know for this particular test virtualization of an Azure VM. If I wanted to go ahead and log into it from here, right? Remember, this is virtualized on the Axcient cloud, on Axcient's x360Recover virtual office. This will use VNC to go over to the Azure VM. Should only take some seconds here to initialize. You'll see that the machine is up, and I can click and send the send Control Alt Delete command, and then be able to access that machine if need be. All right, so that sums up the second and final demo for the Azure with Azure VMs with Virtual Office, and then the first one was recovering using D2C with local cache. So if you're interested in hearing, how MSPs are using third-party backups for Azure, join the business track after the break. Luis Alvarez, CEO of Alvarez Technology, will be talking about how he packages and positions Axcient D2C for Azure for his clients, or come see me in the technical session and for a deep dive into the automation features of x360Recover.